There we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this Google Hangout with FBIT. So if you are watching live, that would be great to be able to answer questions, etc. I'm going to be talking about game development at UOIT at FBIT, and so please tweet us and answer questions, etc. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. So anyway, so yes, I'm going to be talking a little bit about game development. I'm going to give a little mini lecture and then open it up to questions. So please ask questions any way you like. We're monitoring YouTube, Twitter, and the hashtag is Hangout with FBIT if you'd like, or just tweet at FBIT at UOIT, or if you're in Google+, make sure you click the Q&A in there and ask some questions there if you like to, and we'll save those for the end. But I will go right into it. I'm going to switch over to my screen in a sec. Okay. All right. Should be able to see that. Okay, great. All right, so welcome. I'm going to be talking a little bit about game development and how we implement game development in a program at UOIT. My name is Dr. Andrew Hogue, and I'll be talking about three things, essentially. I'm going to talk very briefly about who am I, what is game development, and then how we've sort of taken on game development at UOIT and what are the differences between us and other programs. And please ask questions later on, and I'll answer anything you like. Okay, so my name is Andrew Hogue, and I'm an associate professor in game development at UOIT. I have a PhD in computer science. My background is computer science. So I'm a computer scientist, a programmer at heart. No, what did you do?
It won't. That's fine.
What?
It won't
do the whole thing?
It won't do the whole thing when it was full screen.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry about that. So we had to go to a view that's, there we go.
Oh. Okay, so back to, sorry for the technical difficulties. Who am I? I'm an associate professor in game development at UOIT. I have a PhD in computer science. I'm a programmer in my background. I did my master's in virtual reality technology. So I built some virtual reality systems, large virtual reality systems, caves, head tracking systems, etc. I did my PhD in autonomous underwater robotics and computer vision. I do contract services for game and app developers. I've worked in the space industry as a simulation and computer vision developer. I've worked with Toronto Fire Services and Certified General Accountants of Ontario to develop training games and serious games for them. I've been the program director for quite a long time, except for this year because I'm on research leave this year. And I typically teach these courses. I teach a second-year animation algorithms and techniques course, where we talk about the algorithms underlying locomotion, movement, interpolation schemes, etc., and how engines actually implement animation, and then how you can utilize that effectively in your games. Second year intermediate computer graphics, where I talk about shader algorithms, computer graphics algorithms, OpenGL, GLSL, and how to actually make your games look pretty with interesting algorithms. And I also teach third year game engine design, where it's more of a software design course, focused on how game engines are developed, how to develop different strategies, different programming strategies to organize data, etc., for game engines and make them and optimize them. Sometimes I teach first year essential math for games courses or fourth year debugging courses, depending on the year. Professionally, I'm a programmer. Personally, I'm a hobby artist. I do a lot of sculpting and painting in my spare time, and I find that having a little bit of both there, having the art sort of as a hobby, really informs my creative side and helps my development as a game developer and as a programmer as well. Okay, so what is game development? What what I assume game development is essentially this. This is the definition that I take. This is the process in which games are designed, built, and released. And a lot of people think of game development as just simply one aspect of these. A lot of people think that game development is just building games. No, it's a lot more than that. Game development is literally a process. It's about designing, ideation, creating new ideas, being creative in that way, building them, testing these ideas, and releasing them, but also marketing them, creating business strategies, understanding how to actually release them appropriately. There's a whole business side of game development as well that is important to understand when developing these games. Different aspects of game development that we cover in our program. Essentially, there's obviously programming and technology aspects of it. There's the hardware, there's the software, code development of games. This is the actual part where you write code and it runs on a piece of hardware. There's art and animation aspects of it. So obviously artists and animators, they work and they develop art assets. They're the creative bunch that makes your games look nice, and that's sort of what you see at your end. There's obviously the design team, and the design aspects of game development are how do you actually make gameplay interesting and fun. This is sort of the role of the designer. And then there's obviously the business aspects to it. From a game developer coming out of university, you're going to be either working for a larger firm or a smaller company, or potentially starting up a new company. All of these aspects have business sides that students should understand. So who needs game developers? A whole bunch of different people. It's not just the entertainment video game industry. There's video game companies, obviously. Those are the ones that you typically think of when you think of game developers. There's also board game companies. Board games are still being developed, and a lot of people play board games. And it's still the same techniques, similar techniques for video games as with board game development. Simulation companies, flight simulators, the military, R&D, et cetera. All these people are looking for game developers these days. Educational software developers are looking for game developers. Human resources to develop training systems. So that means that pretty much any company can now utilize game development in their training systems. Escape rooms. I'm a big fan of escape rooms these days, and there's a lot of people who are creating escape rooms, and guess what? They need puzzle developers, and puzzle developers are game developers. And something that you typically don't think of is filmmakers or TV production houses that need game developers these days. So a lot of film and TV production houses around the world, but in Toronto especially, are taking their intellectual property and developing video games from them so that you can reach a wider market and get your content out there. And that's important for people to understand, is that it's not just the AAA games. It's not just one side of video games that we look at and that needs game developers. Everybody needs them these days. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of teams that build games. There are obviously the AAA titles, the large games that you typically buy at EB Games, etc. These are really large teams, really large budgets, really large scopes. Example here, Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed 2 was rumored to have about 450 developers and a $20 million, $24 million budget approximately. And they built this game over 1 to 2 years. Assassin's Creed 4 was rumored to have about 900 developers. So this is the scope of this project. So students have to understand that when developing video games in a classroom type scenario, they're not going to be building the next Assassin's Creed. They just don't have those resources. So you have to think a little bit smaller, and you have to think a little bit differently. Contractors are typically, that's one avenue where people typically take. Once you have a lot of experience in the game industry, people typically go and become a contractor. A lot of people go become contractors, where they work in their discipline on limited time contracts for different companies. They go from company to company, title to title, to sort of work on different projects. But the ones that interest me the most, and I think should interest students the most coming into any game development program, are the indies. because that's where you have small teams, small budgets, and small scope. And so you can build these games very effectively in a short amount of time. But the hard part is that they have to be different than the AAA titles. They have to innovate. They have to be interesting. They have to take chances. For great risk, there is potentially great reward. And this is where the indies are typically doing, typically what they're doing. And I find that this is what's pushing the game medium forwards. The artistic, creative medium of video games are being pushed forward from the indies. And I find that these games are what students should be being inspired from. Okay, salaries for game developers range all over the place. This is data taken from this link up here, which is the 2014 Gamma Sutra Salary Survey. Highly recommend it. It's a good read. But essentially, here's the outcome from that. Programmers mostly top the list at about 93,000. This is in the US. In Canada, 82,000 average salary, etc. And so you can see the different salary ranges. So obviously the ones with more technical experience typically have higher salary ranges. And that's just unfortunately the way the game industry currently is. Now, what goes into building a game? What goes into building a game? There's a lot of technology. So I'm a programmer at heart, so I typically focus on the technology side of things. Game technology comes in a variety of forms. What you're typically going to understand is that you've heard the term engine, game engine. What that is just a software system, a system of components. Things like Unity, CryEngine, and Unreal Engine are sort of popular these days because they're freely available. You can use them to publish on app stores, and they're very fully featured. And I highly recommend that people start taking a look at these and getting their feet wet with these. We use these extensively in our program, but we also talk about the underlying technology underneath these engines, because you still have to understand to go beyond what the engine is capable of, at least at its basics. You have to understand a lot of fundamental knowledge, and that's what we like to focus on. Of that fundamental knowledge, a lot of it is math and physics. So in math, you need to understand things like vectors, matrices, rotations, transformations, collisions, interpolation, curves, lines, shapes, trigonometry, and simple calculus. That's a lot of stuff. And that's just a start. So there is a lot of math involved in game development. But it's worth understanding that, yes, you need to understand some of the math. Even if you're going to be using an engine, you don't necessarily have to implement the vector library or the matrix libraries, but it certainly helps you to be able to understand that if you're doing level design or game design in general. Physics is important. You'll have to be able to understand basic physics, and I mean grade 10 physics. I don't think nothing really tremendously further along than that, unless you're going to be building a physics engine yourself. But basic Newtonian physics can go a long way with forces and torques and springs and rigid bodies, etc. So if you've taken grade 10 or higher physics, you're pretty set for the fundamental knowledge necessary for building games. Now the question is, how do you utilize them in a gameplay scenario, and how do you make that physics interesting and fun for players? From a computer science perspective, you need to be able to, there's a lot of programming languages out there. We see a lot of C, C++, C#. Sometimes you see Java and Python, and a lot of scripting languages. Usually you see C, C++, and C# these days. And you'll become familiar with that as you go through a game development program. Basic programming constructs, necessary fundamental knowledge, logic, functions, recursion, memory pointers, etc. And more importantly, data structures. How you organize data is important. From a computer graphics perspective, there's algorithms and shaders necessary to be able to make sure that you get the frame rate that you want with the aesthetic that you want, to make sure that it looks right, but also runs at a proper frame rate so you can actually implement the gameplay. It's not just a static frame. And as you go further on, statistical and research methods is necessary as well. And for people who are interested in game testing or game user research, to understand how do you know whether or not you've hit your marks, hit your targets on the game design aspects. The game development cycle has a lot of different aspects. This is a very high-level overview. Starts with prototyping. A lot of people think it starts on the computer immediately when you're building video games, and it actually starts on pen and paper. And it should stay in pen and paper for a long time. And then once you've prototyped certain mechanics in pen and paper, you go into the digital prototyping, where you build a very, very rough aspect of your game that proves some point, proves the game mechanics, the basic core fundamental mechanics of your game. And then you can bring that to the design team and iterate on those to make sure that it's fun, it's interesting, etc. Once you go into the development cycle, that's where you have asset development, you have production, you have an iterative process between developing your asset, testing your game, making sure that it's working, building all the different levels, iterating on those, and making sure that they're working correctly before you can do a final release. Now, this is just the development cycle. Now, there's obviously a variety of business side of things. You have to be able to market, strategize, understand where the PR is coming from, and that is something that people often overlook. From a prototyping perspective, this is sort of an example that you can see of why I would say that prototyping on paper is sort of important. Because if you print something out on your computer, on a piece of paper, you can use a pen to circle, write things, write notes, draw arrows, etc., and iterate on these sort of aspects very quickly to get the information to the rest of the design team across stuff that you don't wouldn't normally get if you were just sitting at a computer and moving things around. Sometimes it's more effective this way. On the bottom three images there, you'll see that these are images that I've saw at a talk at the Game Developers Conference one year, talking about one-page designs and prototyping, where this was for the Simpsons game, one of the Simpsons games, and they were mapping out Springfield on cardboard first and putting sticky notes everywhere, just to write down and sort of get a lay of the land, get an idea of spatial resources and how things are laid out effectively, so they know exactly where you had to move to get to what resources, etc. And obviously, as they progressed, this cardboard cutout starts to get more and more refined. They get pieces that they can put on there, and they start printing these tangible pieces out, and they can iterate on this design for quite a while on paper before they actually go to the digital prototype. They could prove a lot of game mechanics before they get onto the computer. And the reason they do this is so that you can really make sure that you hammer down the fact that, hey, I have some fun game mechanics here that will then translate onto the computer. Asset creation is the creation of all the art assets. These are levels, models, rigs, sprites, UI elements, textures, normal maps, etc. This is what makes the game pretty. So this would be within the development cycle, where you have a list of assets that you're creating. You hammer out these assets and make sure that they fit the appropriate aesthetic that the producers and the designers require. Now at UOIT, we take an integrated approach. Many different types of game development programs at both the college and university level exist in Ontario. Every program in Ontario or Canada is unique and focuses on the strengths of their individual core faculty members. Very few, if any, other programs in Ontario, however, provide a holistic view of the game development approach that includes business aspects of the game industry. We at UOIT recognize the need to be able to understand the interplay between all these different disciplines. We understand that the programming team implements the low-level engines and tech. The design team implements the gameplay using these engines and technology. The art team implements the aesthetics of gameplay. The business team understands the demographics, the funding, project management, scope, and overall vision. But each of these areas, each of these teams creates decisions that affect and constrain the game as a whole. And that's what we want to get across to all of our students, is that all these decisions that have to be made from a business perspective, but from an art, programming, and design perspective, all affect the entire game. Nothing is done in a silo. And you have to be able to understand how those constraints will affect your own specialty. And in order to understand how to build games, you must build games. Okay, and I'll show you a video in a minute of some work that our students have done. But this is sort of an overview of what you would see in your first year. In your first year, you'll see that there are business courses. This is Introduction to Entrepreneurship and Marketing courses. There are technical courses, intro programming, object-oriented programming, essential math for games. This is 1 and 2. You have design, in game design and digital game design, where you talk about prototyping and digital prototyping and actual development of these game designs. And also graphic design, which is the art aspects of the video game. And everybody has to take all of these in your first year, and second year is very similar to this. As you progress, obviously you can specialize later on in terms of programming and design with different electives and different minors, but these give you a holistic view of the constraints that every aspect of video game development gives you. More importantly is the game development workshop, and that's what grounds and integrates all these different courses into one large project, which is building a game. So that's our view. If you want to learn how to build games, you have to build them. And so from day one, you're in a workshop building games in a production environment. We've been fairly successful. A lot of our students have gone on to work at different companies. Oops. Sorry. So here's just a sampling of different companies that our students have ended up in. Things like Gameloft, Relic, Glue Mobile, Red Storm Entertainment, Autodesk Behavior, Autodesk. People have worked on Rainbow Six Siege, and things and other obviously smaller game companies as well. But we're very proud of our students and what they've been able to accomplish. I'm going to go and I'm going to show you a video of our from YouTube. If I can get this back. Okay, hold on.
Just flip over on the bottom left. Chrome.
There we go. And I will go here, and I will do this, and I will do that. Apparently that's not coming up on the Google Hangout for some reason. So if you go to the FBIT site, you can find FBIT on YouTube. You can find our demo reel there as well, which showcases some of our student work over the last few years.
Just click yourself.
All right, so sorry about that. Apparently technical difficulties with Google Hangouts. But if you have any questions, I would love to answer them, obviously about game development at UOIT. So please ask the questions, ask away, and I'll wait for the questions to come. So yeah, so still waiting on questions, but if you have questions and you can't think of them right now, feel free to send an email or a tweet or on our Facebook pages, and we can follow up with you later. Oh, there we go. Here's a question. Why did you get into the world of game development? Why did I get into the world of game development? Because I find games exciting, interesting, and I'm a software developer, and what better way to, what better type of software to develop than video games? What do you like about being a prof at UOIT? That's a good question. Yeah, UOIT is exciting. It's an exciting place. It's a new and young environment. We have fairly small classes. I get to know the students very well. Students are great. We have a lot of flexibility in terms of what we teach, how we teach it, and obviously that I get to know the students very well is very important to me as well. All right, so if anybody has any questions, definitely send an email. You can send an email directly to me at andrew.hogue@uoit.ca, or submit it to the Facebook or Twitter accounts, and that'd be great. So thank you very much.